Well, trade between China and the European Union has thrived over the last few years. Trade's picked up since 2020, hitting more than 20% annually, pushing trade in goods to a record high of more than $900 billion last year. China ships all kinds of things, toys, furniture, clothes, footwear to the EU, buying back things like leather goods and alcohol. But the top traded items are machinery and cars. There's been a big increase in China's export of electric vehicles, with companies like BYD, NIO, MG and XPeng winning over European consumers. Brussels estimates that Chinese-made EVs could account for 15% of all EVs sold in Europe by the year 2025. And that rise in the popularity of Chinese EVs is part of the rising trade imbalance between the two economies. By the end of 2022, the EU's trade deficit with China widened to a record $276 billion. Well, Adam Dunnett is Secretary General of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China.
What we're looking for is a level playing field, the same thing we've been looking for the last 20 years. And of course, China's continued to open and reform, but in many areas, it's still not a level playing field. And so for our companies doing business here, they're not able to make the investments that they would like to. I think China's missing out, not being able to attract the investment that it wants to attract.
How does the EU plan to address the trade imbalances, especially with China increasing its industrial capacity?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, this is the biggest eyesore, and it's hard to avoid this. 400 billion euro trade deficit last year. It's a historic level. And it gets a lot of attention. So China talks about, it has its big Shanghai import exhibition where it tries to attract investment, but it hasn't been able to do so. There are a lot of barriers that EU agricultural goods and medical devices are facing trying to export to China, and so I think China needs to look at some of the look at some of its regulations and see how it can better harmonize and get the assurance it needs to bring these products into China. The EU has a lot of export capacity, and we'd like to see it digested here.
The EU's recently announced €3 billion in subsidies for electric vehicle battery production. I mean, I wonder how will that impact the EU-China relationship?
Well, it's a very topical point right now. I think they've taken a cue from what they've seen happening in China in terms of how emerging industries have developed, and I think what's important is subsidies do exist out there, but they need to be implemented in according to market-based principles that have been set up by the WTO and need to be respected accordingly. So perhaps this will give European automakers a little bit of an edge and support that they need to compete in this very, very important market.
What would success look like at the end of this summit?
We can't expect, overnight for things to change immediately, but lots of small steps along the way that we've seen, for example, with the 24 measures coming out of the State Council, the relaxation of visas, the extension of the individual income tax. Those sorts of things are positive signals that business will look at and say, hey, this is a place where we can still do business. But we have to consider that in the broader context where there's a lot of security measures, security measures with anti-espionage law, the foreign relations law, with self-sufficiency directives that sends a mixed signal to business. And so we need to keep the momentum going, as President Xi himself said, and we do that by sending positive signals, and then we look to see what the results of those are, because it's easy for leaders to say things. Ultimately, the judge needs to be is where does business put its money at the end of the day.